Good morning, everybody. I am honored to be a part of this work that you're doing at this summit. I have great respect for the work that you do, and I see it every day on my campus, and I want you to know that I'm honored to be here. But I'm in a bit of a tough situation if you think about it. I'm in a situation similar to the man who survived the Johnstown flood in Pennsylvania in the 1930s. And he had a time over his life of telling the stories about the flood and the water and how high it rose and how dangerous it was and so on. And he got to a point where he was sort of embellishing those stories over his life. And when he died, he met St. Peter at the pearly gates and asked St. Peter if it would be okay if he could continue to tell those stories about the flood in heaven. And St. Peter said, yeah, that would be fine, but just remember that Noah's in the audience. So I'm in a very similar situation. You know much more about the subject than I do, but I hope I can say some things that might be meaningful to you. One of the things I value most about my work, besides serving as a university president, is the opportunity I have to teach a class, and I do that each year. It's a class that I team teach with a group of faculty colleagues, and it really focuses on place, or our sense of place. And oftentimes we use the campus as an example, but we look at it through several different lenses. We look at it through history, we look at a place through culture, through film, through literature, through landscape, and through architecture. So each of the students in this seminar, usually about 20 students, come away with the subject being the same, but all the different ways you can look at the idea of place. And there's a tendency, because we're teaching it on the Clemson campus, to use that campus as an example about place, as you might imagine. And this has been a passionate interest of mine really my whole life, both my professional life as an architect and a faculty member in architecture, but also as a university president. Obviously, I have a special interest in looking at it now through, and I'm in my 13th year of serving as Clemson's president, but looking at the campus as a distinctive place in America's physical and our cultural landscape. And I have a strong prejudice about this, I have to confess it from the beginning, because I think campuses have a unique value, and I worry, frankly, about our campus's future. It's clear to me that community is an outgrowth of place. Community is an outgrowth of the quality of place. The quality of community is shaped very much by the quality of place. I hope you agree in the work that you're doing. Geography, climate, and the physical landscape, and the ways we alter that physical landscape when we build buildings on it, all these things help to shape the human communities that we have built and shaped over time. And our institutions have built wonderful communities of scholars, teachers, and learners on and around our campuses. But these developed in the age before there was any such thing as an online community. What will this new age bring? And this is a question I've been pondering, so I thank you for the opportunity to come and explore it with you and put these thoughts together for this presentation. And I've not given this anywhere else, so I'm anxious to see how it turns out. I'm anxious to hear from you about it as well. The title of my talk is The Idea of Campus in a Digital World. And I could have subtitled it, What Happens to My Campus When Learning Moves Online? Now, notice I said when and not if, because learning has already moved online, as you know. We're already there. And we see clearly how changes in information and communication have completely disrupted and remade entire sectors of our economy. I mean, if you think about the banking industries, the retail industries, broadcasting, music, recording industries, newspaper, magazines, and book publishing have all been disrupted dramatically by electronic publication, by electronic means. It's clear that technology and economic disruptions to higher education will be equally profound. We've just not seen the full impact of that yet. Gone is the idea that learning must take place at this particular place, at a campus, in a classroom with a teacher standing in front of 15 students, or in my case 20 students in my seminar, 50 or even 500 students. Now, our students seem to be welcoming these changes, but how are they embracing and integrating them into the campus as we know it? And what will always, or will there always be a need and a role for place-based education? I think there will be, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what form it will take. But I also know that we can't afford to be complacent about this. We have to think critically about the value of place in higher education. And we have to define it and we have to defend it. But we also have to plan strategically to be able to adopt campuses to accommodate the great changes in the way higher education is delivered and the way it's consumed in the 21st century. Now, this is the journey of thinking that I've been traveling on, and I thought you might want to travel along with me here. And I then would ask for your thoughts. In my remark this morning, I'm really sort of dividing this up into three parts. I want to sketch very briefly the evolution of the American campus as a distinctive place and outline challenges that we face today. Second, I want to make a strong case for the value of place-based education and the value of campus. And then offer a concrete vision for how our institutions and our campuses can adapt and remain vital as a part of America's future. That's the final component. So let's look first at this idea of evolution and how our campuses have evolved. In his 2006 book, American Places in Search of the 21st Century Campus, the late Perry Chapman traced the evolution of the American college campus from its roots in a cloistered, inward-looking medieval colleges in Europe to the institutions that we have in the New World here that have evolved into much more open and rural, in many cases, public and welcoming spaces. So you had a sort of contained inward focusing to something much more extended and embracing of the community. And Chapman reminds us that the word for campus in Latin means field or lawn. So the roots of the idea of campus begin in Latin with the idea not of buildings but the space between buildings. I think that's important. So in many ways, the Romans seemed to understand that it was not just the donut but the hole in the donut that was important. And certainly Thomas Jefferson agreed with that in the way he shaped the academical village at the University of Virginia, which is still the archetype, don't you think, for our college campuses. You almost always begin by looking at that lawn and how the buildings are arranged around it in these series of really wonderful sort of terraced down outdoor rooms. So the spaces in between the buildings and the buildings themselves were important to Jefferson. And Chapman and I agree that the idea of campus begins with 5 concepts, and I'll lay each one out briefly. The first is that the campus as place. Each campus is a distinctive place. It serves as a narrative that helps us tell our institution's story. Our story as a university is told in the physical manifestation of campus, and each one of us does that differently because each of our stories is different, right? Second one is the campus as community, an intentional community. We were not born on our campuses. We chose to work or to study there. It's a place of diversity and a place of unity at the same time, by the way, which is pretty tricky business. Third, a campus as a place that's stimulating and energetic. It really bustles with ideas, with creativity and innovation. One of my colleagues compared it to, this is a quote from him, a beehive of purposeful activity. A beehive of purposeful activity. And fourth, Chapman also thinks of a campus as a work of art. For many of us, the first designed and beautiful and cohesive campus environment, designed and beautiful object or landscape we ever experience is a campus. As these 18-year-olds come, they haven't seen anything quite like that before. And they're usually blown away by it if you think about their normal reaction. And the fifth that I agree with Chapman on in terms of the campus definition is the campus as a place of pilgrimage, a place we return to as we return to a shrine. And we have a renewed sense of belonging to an energetic community that we experienced and that had such meaning for us, such depth of meaning in our youth. One of my favorite metaphors of a campus is the idea that the campus is a garden, a highly cultivated place where seeds are planted that may bloom many years later, where our faculty teach our students, curate the culture, expand the boundaries of knowledge through research. Bart Giamatti, who was president at Yale and also CEO of Major League Baseball, wrote this: "The campus is a place where, quote, we till the soil in patterns and with purpose," close quote. So the idea of the campus as garden is a pretty powerful metaphor. And certainly the vision of the ideal campus in America with its clock tower and its lawn and its buildings gathered around are certainly ingrained into the American psyche. Most Americans can picture that as soon as you say campus. The ideal has persisted through about a 375-year history of higher education in America, and it's evolved from small religious schools to major public universities and even community colleges. The idea of campus is still very strong. It survived and prospered during the democratization of higher education following the passage of the Morrill Act and the GI Bill, which are two very important steps in our history as universities. But my question is, can it survive the Great Recession and the digital world and the Internet? The writer and editor Jeff Selingo, who's with the Chronicle of Higher Education, has been among the most thoughtful people commenting on the forces reshaping our, what he calls a disruptive higher education system. He says that rising tuition, student debt, and the expectation for customization, online 24/7 services have led many to conclude that the old model of instruction delivery is flawed and permanently broken. The old model is institutionally focused and faculty-centered, tied to hours spent in classrooms and an arbitrary semester-based calendar. Why? Because that's the way it was done when the monks began doing this in Europe a long time ago. Students, as we all know, are student-centered. They're not faculty-centered and they're not institution-centered. They're student-centered. And Selingo writes this is a quote, "While amenities and services on campus have been redesigned in the last decade with students clearly at the center, the core of the academic experience for students today is almost exactly the same as it was for their parents and grandparents decades ago." I give you these ripped from the headlines indicators of the challenges that we face. Total student debt has now surpassed credit card debt in the United States. That's a big place for those curves to cross. While personal income and household wealth has stagnated and declined for many families. The middle class is getting squeezed from every direction. They want their children to have a great education, but they're looking for something less expensive. They want to find an alternative. Many of these families have concluded that they can't afford the full college experience. Last fall, a Stanford professor offered his class on artificial intelligence for free online for his students in his class and free online. He sent out a single email notice and he wound up with, how many students do you think? 160,000 students that said, I want to be a part of that. He's now left his tenured position at Stanford and launched an online university called Udacity. PayPal founder Peter Thiel has set up $100,000 fellowships to pay for 20 selected students not to go to college and to take those grants and become entrepreneurs. A company called Straightliner is offering as many online courses as a student can handle for $99 a month or $990 for a full year of college. MIT has announced that it's creating MIT-X, a self-serve learning system in which students can take online tests and earn certificates after watching free course material posted online. Now, I must admit, when Stanford and MIT does that, it's gotten my attention. When the University of Phoenix or others were doing it, it didn't have quite the same impact. Why would MIT do such a thing? Is it being altruistic and civic-minded to share its knowledge so freely? I think there's some of that involved, no doubt about that. But MIT surely also understands two things. First, that its campus is a vital place of research and discovery. Innovation has real economic value. In his book, Where Good Ideas Come From, the author Stephen Johnson traces the natural history of innovation from coffee houses and cafes in Europe through university classrooms and laboratory to today's computer networks and online communities. And he says that human beings are social creatures and that it is the random collision of people and ideas that launch, and hunches, that launch discoveries and innovation. He believes that these collisions between people and ideas will always take place in the real world in a physical sense, but also online, in cyberspace. He even writes about MIT's famous Building 20, which was built as a temporary building during the Second World War but lasted for 55 years because it was such an effective breeding ground for ideas and for innovation. That's where breakout companies like Bose Acoustics and Digital Equipment Corporations began, in that building. Secondly, MIT understands the strength and prestige of its own brand as a research university and as an educational institution. And its leaders know that there will always be enough excellent students who want to pay handsomely to study at MIT. Students want that experience so badly that MIT can afford to give away part of its core product. By the way, people are still asking the question, aren't they? Where did you go to college? Where did you go to college? Remember that phrase? It has something to do with place. And the answer is, you usually say, I studied at Clemson or MIT. These are place-bound responses, but they do represent, I hope, but the past, present, but what about the future? How will online graduates answer that question? If you're an online graduate, where did you go to college? It's going to be a hard line. My living room or my kitchen or whatever. Which brings me to the second point of my talk today, and that's the value of place-based education. It's a good moment to ponder the question, what is the value of a sense of place? What is the value of a sense of community in a student's education? That's really the core question here. When students can tap into the greatest minds on the planet with a click of a mouse, what will compel them to come to our campuses to learn and to study? Is the value proposition of your institution such that students will always want to study there, at that spot? What is the case for the campus? Simply put, the campus has cultural and historical value, as we've seen. It also has economic value. In a recent New York Times column, Thomas Friedman, who I hope you're reading his work, wrote this, quote, "The best entrepreneurial ecosystems in the future will be cities and towns that combine a university, an educated populace, a dynamic business community, and the fastest broadband connections possible. These will be the job factories of the future." So there's economic value there. Most importantly, the campus experience adds educational value. Having a physical place that engages the students in ways beyond the material is by far a superior way for students to learn. Now, it helps if that place is beautiful, which is part of our jobs, because it attracts people who are seeking that kind of place. It's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Faculty, students, and staff seek the environment because it works and it's worth it. It works and it's worth it. Those are the keys. I've seen that demonstrated so many times in so many different ways. In the seminar I was telling you about on a sense of place, will often continue long after the discussion and the class ends and the people walk out of the classroom. The online dialogue keeps the discussion going so that when I start the class back the next week, we're not in the same place we were when we walked out of the classroom. So electronic communication adds to and advances the discussion in ways that we've not been able to do in the past. That's really not the issue. The question in my mind is what happens when we walk out the door and what happens between classes. Let me tell you this story. I was on my way across campus at Clemson, and I saw a group of male students talking to each other, and they had their baseball caps on backwards, and they were just sort of a little bit of chuckling, and I don't know. I said, "What are y'all talking about?" And they're sort of hesitant to tell me. I was sure it was about wide receivers and tight ends and whatever. And they said, "Roman Stoicism." And I said, "Carry on." I don't know what to say. I said, "Carry on." My point there is that this was not a class. This was something that happened because some people bumped into each other, probably stimulated by something, maybe a test that was coming up, or by a discussion that had just taken place. Those chance encounters like this add great value to the proposition of campus. The idea of it being a collision sport is something we need to remember, that learning and teaching is a collision sport. The place made that happen, the physical design of the campus that allows for that kind of contact sport to take place. Nothing about human nature has really changed all that much in the last millennium, if you think about it. Since the invention of books, there have been people who were self-learners, so-called autodidacts, but those people are exceptions, not the rule. Human beings really are social creatures, and discovery and learning are intensely social processes. Even with the latest technology, most of us learn best in a structured environment populated by teachers and by peers. Even with the best teachers, most students learn much more from each other than they learn from their faculty. I learned that as an architecture student very early. I was very happy with the education I got from the faculty members, but if I think back on it, there were some of my colleagues that taught me how to lay out a perspective, that taught me how to assemble buildings in ways that would make them meaningful. It's clear then that a blended education works best. What I mean there is by electronic and place-based. So I think it's time for someone to stand up and say the residential college model, the campus setting, the sense of place that's created there, and the resulting sense of community that grows from that is the best idea we've ever had. It's the best idea we've ever had. Now the question we have to be asking ourselves, how much of a residential experience do students need to feel like they're part of that community? Clemson is a place, a very special place in my view. I'm a little bit prejudiced about that since it's my alma mater as well. And I clearly think that place is important. And I can't see a future in which one could not get an undergraduate degree from Clemson through online courses alone. But how much time must a Clemson graduate spend on our campus to be a Clemson graduate? The answer, I think, is somewhere between 0 and 100%. But where is that line? And how do you answer that question? This is really not a new conversation. If you think back, Clemson has never in its history been a cloistered, ivy-covered place where students and faculty shut themselves away for 8 semesters to read, lecture, and think deep thoughts. We are a land-grant university, and our state is our campus. And from early on, our students worked in the farms, and they alternated semesters at school and work at home, either in a factory or on the farm. Cooperative education has always been a big part of the Clemson experience. Many of our alumni understand that working your way through college is not a hardship, but in many ways it's a blessing. So Clemson's always been a place where students engage the real world. We remember that heritage as we move forward with our goals to make student engagement a cornerstone of our what we call our 2020 plan. I'm now at part 3, and that has to do with vision. And I'll close my remarks with these thoughts. What about America's future? Will our campus be as valued in the future as they have been in the past? And we have to begin by making sure that the public understands that our campuses are not quaint, ivory-covered sanctuaries. They are vital places where both creating and using technology is reshaping our world. Perry Chapman calls it the clicks and mortar. And what he's describing is both campuses as they exist as place-based institutions as well as online. Our faculty are combining the best of technology-enhanced education with face-to-face, one-on-one teaching and learning. A decade ago, agencies and institutions began looking at ways to incorporate technology into their undergraduate classroom. You may have an experience similar to the one I'm about to describe here. If not, I hope you will. The result of that was what we call a scale-up studio classroom. And that was a model that was adapted by institutions really worldwide, and certainly we were one of those. The scale-up acronym evolved from its base in physics to mean student-centered active learning environment for undergraduate programs. Students typically sit around in groups of about 6 or 8 around some technology-enabled tables. And these are in math classrooms and science classrooms. Think of them that way, rather than rows of desks. Interaction and group learning is enhanced. The lectures take about 10 minutes and they stop. And then there's discussion around each of these tables, and technology is used as students are working on problems, and you can project up the students that are doing it correctly or the mistakes that they've made for the whole class to see after a session at each table for about 10 or 15 minutes. In other words, the 50-minute lecture has come and gone, and it has left in favor of modular, student-centered learning on our campuses. We are flipping the classroom before anyone ever heard about the idea of flipping the classroom. There was a recent 60 Minutes phrase that they used when they were describing the Khan Academy. A decade of experience has proven that this is the optimum way to learn. In our case, there was a swimming pool in one of our buildings, indoor swimming pool. I swam in it in the 1960s. And we converted that into what we're calling a sandbox classroom, and our students love to go play in this sandbox. The process we came to doing that was pretty interesting. A newly formed Department of Engineering and Science Education was given outmoded space in our old YMCA where the swimming pool was back in 2006. And meanwhile, a group of multidisciplinary faculty, what we call the Teaching with Technology community, had been meeting for about 3 or 4 years trying to decide how pedagogically sound it was to integrate new forms of learning, particularly integrating laptops into classrooms. That's back in 2002. And these groups joined forces. This new department and this group faculty joined forces to design and renovate what became known as that sandbox classroom. Ideas and expertise and small pieces of funding came because when you're starting something new, cost is always an issue these days. There was some support attracted as far as seed funding from our provost, and 4 faculty members submitted a proposal that was awarded the HP Technology for Teaching Award, which gave 2 carts of HP tablets, of PC tablets for them to be able to use. Designing appropriate classroom space with an eye on the future is critical, and the primary goal is flexibility. We wanted to create a space that was essentially a plug and play so that when new technology became available or a different configuration of space is needed, we don't have to start from scratch all over again. For example, we wanted to make sure that we had enough power to handle additional technology in the future, and we wanted to build in a much more flexible environment. We realized we needed to take advantage of having this abandoned swimming pool, so instead of filling it with concrete and gravel, we left it open so we can go underneath and do all the new cables and fiber that we need to be able to adjust it, then feeds up through the floor of this new classroom. So that these technology connections at each of 10 student tables and an instructor station, which also feature a wireless touch panel, and instructors wander anywhere in the room while coaching students working on in-class assignments, and work from any station can be displayed for all to see. The sandbox classroom has been used by faculty in all these disciplines: engineering, computer science, mathematical science, nursing, horticulture, and English. Much of what we've learned in the design and development of this has been used on the classroom is now being applied campus-wide as we build new buildings, and these are the kinds of environments we're designing. All of our introductory math courses and science courses through differential equations anyway in math are now taught in an activity-based manner such as this and in a scale-up mode. Instructors were chosen by their willingness to adapt their teaching to this new instructional activity and their interest in engaging students in the learning process. And after 6 years, what have been the results? The D, F, and W rates, that's 2 grades, D and F, and withdrawal rates in math has decreased dramatically, and freshman retention rates overall have increased in the university. So what it is a kind of math studio. I think of it that way. Many of you are familiar with an art studio or an architecture or a landscape studio environment. And in 2008, I had the opportunity to write an article for the Chronicle of Higher Education, which they called "The Architect as University President." And I hate to quote myself, but I may do this to make a point. The architecture studio is the greatest learning experience ever invented. And in a sense, our campus is one big studio now, and it is. We're trying to slowly make the Clemson campus into one big studio environment. And speaking of that, 2 months ago we moved into a new architecture building, and it is one of America's most energy efficient buildings, but it's also a remarkable building in terms of the quality of light. It has a green roof and overall transparency and openness that this building has, which is basically built around the idea that students learn more from each other than they do their faculty members. Universities are in the forever business, so we can count on the fact that whatever the original purpose of a building was, it's probably not going to be that in the future. So one piece of advice that I would have for each of us, especially you as campus planners, is this: don't think about new buildings in such a way that you limit your ability these buildings to be transformed and used for different purposes. I mean, think about it. They're going to have a life of, I mean, in many cases, 80 years. And buildings on our campus that live that long have probably 3 different kinds of lives. As you charge your architects, I would strongly advise you ask them to think about and give them 2 other purposes this building could be adjusted for. Its original program that they had to work with, but also what happens 20 years later when something completely different is going to be in there. And charge them to do that. Now, it may cost you a little more in terms of how the building will be designed, but it certainly would be worth it, because all you're doing right now is you start to think about renovating buildings that had no clue about what their next life would be. They've got to be in better shape, and maybe the third life. So that's some advice I might give you. Think about at least 3 uses that this building might have, and charge your architects to give you their ideas, and they'll do a good job of that if you tell them up front. My closing thought is this: online education is exploding, and it should explode. When it's well designed and well executed, it can reach more students more conveniently with deep and rich interactive experience. But there's still no substitute for the experience of going away to college. We have to bring that experience into the 21st century and make it meaningful for today's students. We may have oversold, I fear, the private economic value of the degrees we offer, the economic value of the degrees that we offer. We need to make sure people understand the value of the experience that we offer. There's a difference. The degree is one thing, but the experience is quite another. And place-based has so much more value in the experience. The best education is not transactional, but transformational. It's not, you give me X amount of money and I'll give you a credential and a degree. Rather, it is, you give me 4 years and I'll change your life. That's how we need to think about what we're doing. That experience begins with a physical campus, and it should be functional and inspirational. The campus has always been the place where students begin separating from their families and gain independence. It's a place where the deepest kinds of learning can and should take place. A place where brains are fed and opened and lifelong connections are made. And I believe there will always be students who understand the value of going away to college and want that experience. And America's colleges and universities will always be there for them in a real place called the campus. Now, I will close with this parable, and then I'll see if we have time, which we do, for questions. This is the parable that will illustrate how simple it is for me to talk about these things, but in reality, actually making them happen, it's a whole lot different story. This is the parable. A man lived in the country out in South Carolina, and his driveway connected to a busy highway. Every day, he would go to the end of his driveway, cross the highway, pick up his mail. And one day, after gathering all of his mail, he started back across the highway to his house. And he got about to the center line of the highway. And traveling at a very high rate of speed, a car crested the hill near where he was. He said, "That's not good. I better get over to the mailbox side." Well, just as he started to move in that direction, the car swerved in that direction. And he said, "That's not good. I better go back over to the driveway side." And just as he moved, the car moved in that direction. Well, he panicked, froze on the center line of the highway, and a car came screeching to a halt right in front of where he was standing, just a few inches from where he was. And the window of the car rolled down, and behind the wheel of the car was a squirrel. And the squirrel said, "Not as easy as it looks, is it?" I'd be happy to answer your questions or your thoughts about what I've had to say here. Yes.
I thought what you said was right on point, and I hope we can get it clear. A lot of thought we're going to have about the global nature of what you said. The American nation goes through the global nation. Sorry. And I'm 4 years into the education community, so I'm still learning. The students are not waiting for provisions, they're waiting for us to come to consensus. They're deciding whether it's tweeting or whether it's Facebook or YouTube. They're figuring it out, they're doing it fast. Can we catch up?
I think that's a great question. Let me answer it by just making it more complicated in a way. 3 weeks ago, we opened on the campus something called the Social Media Listening Center. It's a partnership that we have with Dell and a software company called Radon 6. And they have created this technology, and they wanted a campus to road test it. Here's what you do when you walk in this room. There are panels of TV screens all over all 3 walls in the room. At any moment, you can see what's being said on any subject around the world, on Twitter, Facebook, any web page or any blogger on any subject that you want to know in real time. It's terrifying. We, for example, the first thing we put up was, what are they saying about Clemson? We want to know when we send out the acceptance letters, what's the traffic? Is it a large amount of traffic? And if it is, it's a large circle. If it's negative comments, it's a red circle. If it's a green circle, it's more positive comments. If it's a small green circle, it means it's positive but not much traffic. So we also have a map of the world, and we know where each of these things are coming from. We can go into individual tweets that are being sent. It's all in the public domain. We're not cheating here or anything about what they're saying individually about each of these things. Imagine this technology. We had the CEO of Wendy's Hamburgers on our campus, and we were showing some other things about packaging science, and we took him to this room, and he said, "You mean to tell me that you know right now what's being said anywhere in the world about my cheeseburgers?" And we had it programmed and said, "Yes, sir," and we hit the button, and there's everything that's being said about Wendy's cheeseburgers at that moment. We have a group of graduate students that are studying the relationship between social media and the stock market. I'm about to turn over our endowment to these kids to see whether we can anticipate what drives what. Is social media driving the stock market driving social media? How can we anticipate what one is going to do by studying through this new tool that we have? So I think the power of all this is mind-boggling. At least it wasn't for me in that particular instance. But whether we can move fast enough, which is your core question, I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. It's a little bit terrifying because the pace is incredible. And you're right, students, they don't have patience about any of this. But we've turned this over to them. I'm not sure our faculty can handle it. We've given it to our students and say, see what you can make of this. And that's what this Dell wants us to do. Road test this for us, see where the value is and what might happen. Can we take one more? Yes.
Thank you. I know there's a lot of criteria in considering success, but when you look at students that have traditionally done an online program versus those that are valuing the experience, has there been research done yet on what that end product is that is the result of their studies?
Not that I've seen. Some of you in this room may know whether that's been able to be. I think you're talking about something where that value would best be understood a little bit further down the road. But the PayPal founder giving a $100,000 fellowship to people not to go to college and start the entrepreneurial route might be an indication. What happened to those people? I think there are 20 of them. You know, what happened to them? Now, they're very bright people, I'm assuming, at least the best you can determine for a 17-year-old. And we'll see what becomes of that. That's sort of a guided experiment. We'll see how that affects it. But I have not seen such research. Has anybody in this room seen that yet? It may be a little too early to know, but we better pay attention. Make sure the criteria are correct, but we better pay attention. Yes. Can we, how are we doing on time? Should this be the last question, Tracy? Should this be the last?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want the microphone down here? I think we're recording this. So ask a good question.
Good morning. I think it's great to have a facility-type professional in the president's office. It's pretty rare, if you think about that. My question to you, sir, is that in your circles and travels with other university presidents, what's going on in their heads as it relates to our facilities profession, and do they get it?
I knew you were going to ask me that question. I tried to do some thinking about it, and I just don't know that I can look at it like a normal president. I mean, you got an architect in the president's office, so, you know, what are you going to do? You know, well, we better not screw it up. That's for one thing, for sure. I know one thing that's happening is when I meet with architects to either charge them to their work or look at the work they've done, they're pretty short meetings. As you can, I'm the worst client an architect ever had. I try to be reasonable, but we usually get to the point pretty quickly. As far as how could I advise you to work to be even more successful with the presidents you work for? I would say this. University presidents are under enormous stress. The economy and the notion of what tuition should be and how to manage all the constituents that university presidents have. If you can simply make their lives simpler and better and more efficient through the work you're doing without being heavy-handed, as much time as you can get to know them and the way they think, and maybe that will help you position yourself to be able to do that. I think in general, they worry about the campus and how it looks and how it functions. But if they're a chemist, they're not quite sure what to do with that. They know that their legacy in some ways is dependent on what's done during their service there. But they've got so many other things, honestly, that's a higher priority right now. If you can gain their trust and move through some decision making and make sure they're comfortable with what you're doing, earn their confidence and trust, I think it'll make everybody's life easier. I think you knew that already, but you just can't imagine so many things being on. If you look at their schedules, you'd be amazed. I mean, everything from football scandals to, legislative mandates to angry parents to, I mean, it's campus is sort of there already. They take it for granted in a way. So you don't want them to do that, but in a way it may help you realize that that's not necessarily at the top of their agenda. Hire good architects. Hire good planners. Don't risk it. It's really important to do that, and then your chances of coming out well and making them look good are going to be even better. Y'all, thank you very much for letting me be a part of this. I look forward to seeing you.